welcome to Arc Rex Temple of Ages, Part 9. I wasn't originally going to do this presentation so fast yet. I had a very interesting dream last night that I've been thinking about pretty much non-stop with its implications, and wanted to do this from the get-go and while it was fresh in my mind, and I was all excited about it. And weirdly enough, Lord of the Rings were very inspirational, yet I want to make a point here that I almost never make the title card first. I usually make the entire presentation first, and I'll kind of go back based upon the vibe. And I think this is one of the first ones ever that I started with the title card like this, or tried to find the picture for the video or the thumbnail before I even started. And I also want to say a huge thank you to everyone who's watching and have been watching these videos. I don't know who you are yet, but maybe someday. Or I at least want to say thank you, since this is a learning process, and I'm not sure, it's kind of weird to split entertainment and education. I guess it's all how close it is in proximity to you and all that. And also, just really quick before I move on with the number naming convention, I did the 7 series, like 7.1 to 7.7 in the last videos, because when I took that break originally from the first 6 presentation videos, it took a few months to build it back up, and I made about 700 slides. And I found out while I was making them, I was watching some of the old videos, that it was just so similar. It was almost like I was making like a 2.0 version of those last 6 episodes I made. And it was a lot easier to go over so many ideas because I was able to connect them without laying out the groundwork of having to talk about it, because each video I don't go back and explain what, for example, the Naruto or One Piece anime from Japan are. Yet, back in the older videos, I did go over those in much more detail. So, if you're hearing these ideas and you like what you're hearing and you just joined us in these last few videos, I would suggest that you go back to the earlier ones. I don't talk as fast and concise, and there's a lot of more audio problems, I would say, or me being repetitious in what I'm saying. Yet, the information should speak for itself. And I'd say, apart from maybe the first or second video, it starts really picking up pretty fast. I learn very fast, and I'm hoping not to breathe as heavily into the mic, yet I'm still working on how this works for me, since, like I say, I do these off the cuff, and each picture I go through, I have to look at it and figure out what I want to say about it, also the exact words I want to say about it, and how it relates to everything, while also having a very short time to say it. So I'm getting better with it, and the cool thing is that kind of learning style, that once you get better at it, I'll just be able to do this for hours and hours just off the cuff, because this is already in my brain, and this presentation's helped me a lot, just getting better at talking about this. And one of the reasons I'm doing it, since I haven't been able to actually talk to, in person, anyone about this information for about a year now at least. So it's just been kind of stewing in my brain, and the only time I get to talk about it have been probably these last 15 hours or so I've made on the presentation. So I thank you for that, for being here. This is kind of the ground floor beginning of it all, when it's very quiet, and if this ever does take back, I'll look back to these days very kindly and fondly, when it was all quiet and there wasn't all this responsibility and craziness. Yet it seems that's why I'm here. So while I was making this presentation, actually, because I put this all together the last 2 hours pretty much, because it's just been boiling out of my head, all these things I've been thinking about, especially how it's connected to what we're talking about, and how the Eye of Sauron in the Lord of the Rings and this Ring of Power we've been talking about is related to Saturn in this time loop, because I was talking a lot about the dog time loop, or the Sirius time loop, in the last episode, and how this model of reality is actually represented very much like in the Loki show, which was very much talking about the multiverse and the mind of God, that this person right here was making his own timeline. So he's making a stable timeline where the things happen he wants to happen, so his dreams are coming true at the expense of everyone else, kind of like Sauron, that this interdimensional entity that's looking down on everybody is manipulating reality so it can turn the entire world like Mordor, or Murder, where it is that vibration it has, it wants to spread it out. And the reason I made this video tonight And I'm talking into the black cube once again, out into the infinite multiverse, or who knows the reaches and implications of all of this. That I had a very interesting dream. And I just really like this meme right here because it relates kind of this mismatch of all these memes at the end of time. That throughout my life, I've always had these crazy vivid dreams. While it seems like most people, it's just very similar to their day-to-day lives. You know, there's a lot of weird dream logic that's going on in their dream. Yet, for the most part, it's like, oh, I was hanging out with my girlfriend and we were having lunch, and oh, then this weird thing happened. And in my dreams, it's just non-stop, like all over the place, especially lately, alien invasions and things like that. It's kind of a 50-50, like 50% of them aren't all crazy, but then the other ones are, and they're related to my dreams and almost every video game I've ever played. So all these characters I've taken throughout all my journey are also repeating in my dreams, which is also very interesting. And this quote right here was saying that you can find dreams, you can find truth in dreams, and especially nightmares. Because we can learn the most from cautionary tales, especially if you're living the cautionary tale that you're like, okay, we're done with this. It becomes a lot like Back to the Future. It's like, all right, we learned our lesson, let's go back to when it was good. Because we learned from the nightmare. And I just kind of want to have the flip side, that truth lies not only in a dream, but in many dreams. So I also, as I'm saying all this, I'm not saying I know I'm right. I'm kind of following the information like everybody else and kind of asking what to do with it. And I think it's more of the choice. Yet the problem is you can decide to try to help things, but it doesn't always work out according to plan or your original intention. Like, oh, I'm going to say something nice to this person. And the other person doesn't see it that way. So there's this whole balance, and also just looking into dreams and what you can find them, because they are open to interpretation. They can be very clear to yourself, yet a lot of them, it doesn't necessarily mean it's written in stone. It might be a cautionary tale, so that dream you had leads you on the right path so you don't experience it. Because even if you don't think there's a lot to dreams, the mainstream opinion is that it's modeled off your day-to-day life, and it's kind of predicting and running different scenarios that could happen, so that your lucid day-to-day brain is more experienced, because packed way down there is that memory of what you could do. And this dream I had was about taking a test. And it's kind of been a string of dreams the last couple of years, especially, that I have a lot of them take place, or at least part of them take place in schools. And there's one class in particular that I don't really care for. I originally felt really bad because there's a test everyone's taking. And originally, I get disinterested with it and I go and do other things, and it eventually gets to the point where I don't even care to go back to the class anymore. So it's kind of like this idea, the semester's going on and I'm going to all these other classes and having fun, yet there's this one I'm specifically avoiding because I'm just wondering why I'm there. And this, especially with me, is calculus and math. And I have this funny meme here about it, that I've never really liked just this crazy thought experiment math. It's like, hey, I get the concepts, like with calculus, with limits and rates and derivatives, because I've taken it 3 times. And every time it was just too much work, and almost the entire test was the grade of the class. So, like, homework was almost nothing. So if you didn't do the test well because you didn't do the homework and you didn't remember this one specific... Because if you forget one specific equation that was from the homework, that's a logic puzzle specifically meant to trip you up so you can't solve it right with logical reasoning unless you know the special trick that he taught you that one day while you're zoning out because everyone's sleep deprived. And that's one of, 4 AP classes I'm taking that year, and I'm thinking about, going home and playing video games or working out or hanging out with my friends and not learning about this stupid logic puzzle that no one cares about, this extra junk that we put in our head throughout school. Or if it was applicable. The quadratic equation so far hasn't helped my life very much. And it's kind of like created a nightmare in my brain because while I was getting my cybersecurity degree, I had to pass calculus. And I did with a D. And I didn't want to take calculus. I didn't want to go into the computer field and have to do calculus. And I didn't see how calculus was needed except to make them more money. And someone someday thought, oh, hey, let's fill a hole in this curriculum with calculus. Or that it was meant to go to a different program that had physics and calculus in their programming degree, yet I didn't want programming. I was only focused on cybersecurity because I hate all of that. Maybe not hate, but it's the least intuitive thing I've almost ever come across that I have to force myself to do, that I've almost seen no value come back from at all in my own personal life, because it's all just experimental problems. And it's like I've done the math to calculate, oh, hey, a plane's in the air going over here. You know, how far is it going and at what rate and what's its acceleration? Like, I've done that, but, like, how much have I gained from that? Anyway, I'll leave my tangent and my personal crux of this aside. Yeah, basically it'll boil down to, I'm in this class and I don't want to take this test, yet it keeps reverberating in this dream that I'm coming back to this test. And I originally, like I said, I felt really bad about it. I've tried basically what you'd think, all the different ways I've stood up and been like, hey, I'm not taking this test anymore. You know, I'll just leave or not go to the class entirely. Yet the problem with that is you're just kind of leaving this festering problem. And you don't want to deal with it because of all the implications. And even recently, it's that I'll come to and be like, all right, let's do this test. Yet you can imagine it that my whole life's represented in this classroom. So, like, there's food and, like, a TV on the desk because I've just been sitting there tuning out the entire time because I didn't want to take this test. So I'm keep trying to take the test, and all these distractions are coming in. I can't really focus on it. And I even had one recently, like 2 weeks ago, where the teacher's sitting there, like, while I'm taking the test, explaining the criteria of how she'll grade the test, and none of it's making sense to me. So, like, I have all these distractions as I'm at the end of this class. I'm like one of the last people trying to take this test as everyone's basically packing up and leaving. So it's kind of like all these extra levels of stress. And it turned out the solution, so basically I don't even try to take the test this time. I stand up, I go up to her, and I'm like, I'm not taking this test. And second of all, even if I did take this test, you know, this class is already so far gone, this is already a moot point. And she's like, yeah. And I kind of like go, this is stupid. This is all stupid. And I didn't say it earlier, but, like, everyone else in this class was just, like, worshiping this teacher. So, like, everyone was going up and just like, oh my gosh, thank you for what you've done, we love you. And I just say to her, like, you've been mean to me this entire time. This class sucks. I don't like this. Why am I here? And then she turns to me and basically goes, hey, you passed the test. You got 100%. And I'm like, I'll go back to that. But this was my emotion, just like, what? Like, I passed the test by not taking it and then telling you how much your class sucks. Now I don't want to be a part of it? What? And this quote, you cannot lose if you refuse to play the game. I'm not saying play no games, just the idea of this, the reason why that test seemed important was this veneer of society that we live in, and how, like, oh, hey, if you go to school, you do well, you get good grades, you do an extracurricular activity, and you get your piece of paper at the end of it, like your diploma, like, you'll make it, you'll fit in, you're part of the system now, like, you'll get success. And there's all this stress attached to it that may not correlate to your day-to-day lives. It's just all this baggage that you're running around with your chicken with your head cut off, doing all this homework that you're going to forget about in 6 months because you just keep cramming all this useless information in your head. And it's just a test to see how good you are at regurgitating information in a short-term period. And, you know, by the admission of the people that made the public school system as we know it, it was to turn out factory workers and not self-critical thinking individuals. So I woke up, and I was confused about this for a while, like in the dream. And then I remembered Men in Black, and it just fit so well with what I've been saying, especially the last couple of presentations that I wanted to talk about it. Especially how the movie begins, and the character of Will Smith, and how it starts out with this giant brick wall, and it says Brooklyn Battery Tunnel Authority. And just think of, like, Neo from The Matrix. Battery tunnel, like he's in that giant tree or pod collection of people. And they want to trap him there, and this is this giant representation of authority. And you can also think of this as like another brick in the wall. And especially since we were just talking about the education system, that's what it's meant to do. Pink Floyd made the song about it, about turning you into another brick in the wall. Because they don't want these critical individual thinkers. They just want you to toe the line and regurgitate what they told you was right and not question it. And as he's walking in this authority tunnel, on the ground is the nuclear symbol. Or you could think of as an atom. Or this awakened nuclear individual, or this never dying kundalini spirit that just keeps coming back into matter over and over and over again that can't die. And he goes down, and they're taking a test, and they're going to see if he's going to pass or not. And I really like that he stands so much out in this scene. Like, he does not fit in the vibe at all. He's just this weird guy that walks in at the very end. And the first thing he does is interrupt their speech, or interrupt the speech of the authority figure and say, why are we here? You know, just back to my dream, like, he just walks up like, what is this? What are we doing here? Like, what are you all so excited for? You know, you've all been jumping through all these hoops, and what are you so excited about? And the authority figure is like, tell him why we're here. And he stands up and goes, we're the best of the best of the best of the best. Or they're looking for the best of the best of the best. Sir, with his, goofy smile on his face. So they start taking the test, and I kind of want to go back here before I go into that he has this light behind him, and also the map of the globe. But I want, before that, look at the chair he's sitting in, not standing in. It's shaped like an egg, and we were talking about in the last episode that the shape of the egg is related to reality, creation, and generation, and this generative male force. So here they're representing that, the mind of God is creating reality, or matter itself. So his consciousness is creating matter, and they're having this big test to see, all right, who's the best reality creator? Who creates the best matter? Or so the symbolism of the scene would show. Who has the best light of reality? Because we know they're not all equal. So they start taking the test, and his pencil breaks. And this test is designed from the beginning to be a fake test. That they're not supposed to pass this. This test doesn't really matter in the long run. They don't really care, for example, if they know calculus perfectly enough to do this test. It's more about this big picture they're talking about and how capable and adaptive they are. And I kind of wanted to go back that we were talking a few episodes about Excalibur and how it starts out that he has, basically his first test he fails and breaks his unbreakable sword that he's not supposed to break for changing reality in the wrong way. And for admitting he's wrong, he gets his sword back and the power to change reality again, and things start going along again. And it seems like if you're willing to admit you're sorry and you're wrong and trying to find the best way forward. So if you're talking with someone else and you're like, I'm going to say a compliment to this person, they didn't take it as a compliment, that if you apologize, that reality itself kind of sees this and will try to help you back along the path and pick you back up. And in this scene, since everyone's having so much trouble with this test that is designed to make you uncomfortable and make you adaptable, he goes and takes his table and pulls it, and it makes everyone look at him because it's making all this noise and commotion. And it's like this big joke that's just making him seem less and less serious as we come back to that theme. And he pulls the desk up and he's like, hey, anyone want to join in on this? And it just kind of reminded me of Arthur and the Round Table. And I didn't really connect these dots till I made that slide 2 ago, comparing them, and then I realized, like, oh, hey, he pulls up a round table. And speaking of the round table, he has all these knights that do... So if we take this idea back to reality creation, all these people around the table are knights. They take up the masculine mantle and the sword, and they go out into reality and change it. So the male journey is usually very violent, because I talked about in previous presentations that basically everything's built upon violence or the power of force. So if you have the ultimate treaty and some guy walks in with a rock that you can't stop, well, then you don't have a treaty anymore because you can't stop the guy with a rock. And he can... You say the pen's mightier than the sword, but sometimes the sword is mightier than the pen. It depends on the context. If you have a comment about that, let me know. So later on, they give them the Marshall test, and it's on a round platter once again. And it's surrounded with all these alien monsters. And at the end of it, it turns out the main character only shot one thing, and that was the little girl holding the quantum physics books. And the authority figure comes out, and he's like, okay, what's this all about? Why'd you shoot the little girl? Why didn't you shoot the big monster? And he's like, hey, that monster's just like hanging out. He's not doing anything wrong. Like, how would you feel if I was just sitting in the gym and some weird looking alien walked in and just popped me because I looked funny? It's like, you wouldn't like that. So he has the ability to spread that empathy and also talk about how a little girl with quantum physics books has no reason being in a neighborhood at night full of monsters. Like, that doesn't add up. Everything else kind of just chill, or has some context to it that makes sense, except this. And when the authority figures are talking later on, and we can see them as the Watchers because they're up in this hidden room watching everybody, trying to choose the new chosen one to give the mantle this atomic energy, you can see Will Smith's character. He's off the stage, and he's like looking at all the details while everyone's just sitting there basically talking about how cool they are and all their fancy titles, and not really asking the important big questions that are going on. And that's kind of back to Sirius and the Truman Show, because they were just watching the entire time as well. And you can kind of see them in the back there, still looking into all these things, even though they've all long since disconnected, and they're probably just thinking about their fantasy football league and, what model of gun they have in their hand, and, how cool their job is, and, doing all the stuff that dudes usually do when they just stand there talking. And the authority figure comes out, and he's basically like, you're everything we've come to expect from years of government training, so just follow me. So if you're in this system and you're taking the vibration or the download, then it doesn't allow you to see the truth, because you have this tunnel vision that doesn't allow you to see anything. And I took this screenshot of it, and it just blew my mind, because I didn't see at the beginning that behind them was math. So it's like calculus. Like, they're good at calculus, and because they were good at calculus, they didn't pass the test, and they have their memory wiped as they're sent back into the time loop. And it kind of just, the Men in Black that I connected to my dream in this calculus class, and I didn't find out till hours later, and it's crazy how it does that, reality. So he tells the Will Smith character the truth, and how there's basically been aliens or this multiversal travel this entire time, and that they're the ones that are in charge of keeping it secret and keeping the public from knowing about it. And in the third movie, they make a specific point that it's basically Back to the Future, that these two characters on the either side of Will Smith right there is the same person from the future and the past. So they have like this self-fulfilling time prophecy like Back to the Future, trying to fix the time loop. And that's even related back to that. So this is a movie I've been wanting to talk about for a long time. And it has a very interesting name. You can kind of see it on the corner right there. It's based upon a swear word, so I don't really want to say it right now, but it has so much truth in it that I wanted to go over. It's an animated film they made. In the very beginning, they have this dream sequence, and they relate him to Sirius and this dog in the bottom right-hand corner right there, but also all this Christian symbology. And the movie progresses, and I like the scene that there's this guy with the 666 snake on his door that's all evil, and the main character's door is 777, so kind of the lucky number, and he's drawn the attention of the authorities. And they're there to get him, but it turns out he has like this spirit inside of him that takes over, that allows him to win the day. And I kind of want to relate this back to last episode. We were talking about the movie Glass, and this guy right here who has all these split personalities or alters in his mind, and one of them's called the Beast, that gives him superpowers. And we were also talking about this in Eastern media with the anime Naruto. He has this fox demon inside of him that gives him superpowers if he aligns it with himself and his good vibration. And the same with Berserk. All these superheroes that have this dark spirit that if they can control, they get superpowers, and if not, they become kind of like the dragon with the Whore of Babylon. Like, they become the perfect super soldier for the evil system because they're controllable. Yet if they can exude their own dream and willpower, then they can, be worthy of the superpowers, kind of like Neo or the story of Jesus. And I kind of wanted to put this slide in right here that they're going to talk about the Guardians who watch time and fate, and they relate them to the Aztec Empire and the Jaguar and Eagle Warriors. And it was just interesting that I mentioned them in my very first presentation, because the mainstream opinion of that society was that the Aztecs preyed on other societies, and you became a Jaguar or Eagle Warrior based upon how many sacrifices you brought back to the pyramids. Live sacrifices have their hearts taken out because some people were having drug trips and certain entities were telling them to build these pyramids and sacrifice people on them. My opinion, anyway. And that these people have been fighting evil throughout time and space, and here's them fighting Nazis. And I'm going to kind of come back to that in a minute, because I had a weird synchronicity with all of that as well. And here talking about how these luchadors, these basically joke fighters that no one takes seriously, and they think it's just this big play production and there's no truth behind it or deeper meaning. And it turns out that it's the perfect cover for these people that are these guardians of time and space that are waiting for basically the stars to align and for them to save the world. And one of the luchadors is saying it's our job to stay vigilant of the universe for whatever signs or omens that they may find. And they do the wrestling thing to kind of keep them in shape and out of boredom. And later on, it turns out that now the Men in Black are following the main character. And this is kind of a darker version of the Men in Black. And that's why this movie interests me so much. And at one point, one of the Men in Black crash, and it turns out they're possessed by these like giant black slug demons, or this black ooze that we've been talking about. And they have to later go back and clean up the mess because they don't want the world to know about these. And it's a lot like the Men in Black movie cover-ups. It's just this side's a little darker. And then the luchadors, they finally get their sign, which is a cockroach that said, "They came from the depths of the city." That's where the evil comes from, yet I don't have a screenshot, but the main character's related to cockroaches in this film because he's always feeding cockroaches. He's always feeding these bottom-feeding things that everyone steps on, and that's one of the reasons he's the chosen one, is because he finds empathy even with the smallest of creatures. And they end up getting him later on, and they take him to this deep underground facility, and they're monitoring him because he's basically one of their hybrids, but they can't control him. And they're wondering, why can't we control him? And they're basically saying that they're these space aliens that live underneath us in these underground bunkers, and they control the government, and they're basically trying to take over the world and make everyone a weird slug hybrid so that they can, have everyone possessed by these slug demons so they know what's going on and they can control everybody at every time. But you could also link this back to technology as well, maybe. And here's a scene of him with his hybrid, slug powers that he has that gives him all these crazy abilities that make him so dangerous for these authority figures. And this is when the luchadors break them out of the facility because they were watching the signs. And he has this dream of him and the slug demon when he was a kid, and how he's had this symbiotic relationship this whole time, but yet he can control it. And that's what makes him unique. And they make a point that they were also hiding all the best scientists in the world in this underground base, so that when they liberate the base, they have all these scientists that now help them build a rocket. And I kind of wanted to relate the rocket to this ascension symbolism. And in this movie, they use it to black out the sky, because without the sun, these black slug creatures freeze. And when they freeze, they can't come back to life. So that's a way to basically purge the world of them. Yet it turns out later on that they're on the moon already, and they have all these UFOs. And they never made a sequel to this, but if they did, it would be an alien invasion. And just wanted to say that these UFOs look exactly like the bell-shaped UFOs that the Nazis have, and kind of back to that Nazi idea right there. that we'll return to in a minute, but also how this connects to these deep underground military bases that may be hiding this technology from the public, and where these entities might be, no matter how you see them, if you use the word alien or demon or a hybrid or fallen angel or AI entity or black goo creature or what have you. So this brings me to one of the most synchronistic games of my life that I've talked about a few times up until now. And the whole premise of the game is that there's all these monsters that the government's locking away in all these secret societies to try to keep the world from knowing that there's all these monsters everywhere. A lot like the Men in Black. And this game is so unique because every time it's played, the map changes. It has all the same landmarks, but it's jumbled up every time. So, and every role is different, including the monsters, which are played by humans. So, you know, if you tell a monster a joke, it might let you go. Or it might fumble up because a human's playing it. So, you never know what's going to happen, and it's just pure chaos. And my favorite server on it is named after the chaos theory, which is that even the flutter of a butterfly's wings can change the timeline, or in this, cause a typhoon halfway around the world, that these small things have consequences later on in time, and also chaos theory as well. There's a lot attached to it, but also that there's all this entertainment in chaos, and that's why I played it, because I never know what's going to happen, really. Because a lot of video games, you pretty much know what's going to happen. It's in a very small category, and you might have small deviations here and there, but just the amount of deviance in this game between ideas, I've almost never seen anything like it. And that's why I find it so interesting. And there's this thing in it called the Coin of Destiny, and it's only on this server I play that's extra chaotic. It's on a few others, but it's not in the main game. That basically, I've been trying to get this thing to work for months. Like, all the statistics for it, I should have won a flipped a long time ago. And just a few days ago, I got it for the first time. And this night, actually, I got it for the second time after only, like, one other flip, which is just statistically just crazy. And that's one of the reasons I played this game, is that it lines up with synchronicities as well, especially with coins, because there's coins in the game that are just normal, and I've based some strategies off coin flips in this that should not have worked that worked, is the best way I can put this. So I've had some fourth wall breaking synchronicities with this game with coins, and just in the last week or two, you know, I finally have won the Coin of Destiny flip that I've been trying to get to work for months and months and months and months. And in the game, dying over and over and over. So, you know, just going through this time loop over and over and over. And, hey, finally it worked. I almost don't know what to do with it. It's kind of like back to that dream where it's like, hey, you passed the test. And I'm like, what? You know, because I was just so used to failing it. It's just like, what? And usually things for like that don't happen overnight for me, but things have been weird lately. So, and I made a joke about the leader of the Nazis, and you know, it was completely it's a well-known joke about him, and we were making all these raunchy jokes about all these other things that are offensive, but I got banned for a week, and it just makes me laugh that just this crazy joke about him that was obviously over the top. And in response to what someone was saying. It wasn't yeah. And just some people can't take a joke. And more we're going to have this problem of censorship, I think. And it kind of goes to this bigger problem. And especially with a comedy, that people want to have fun and they have a comedian talking and making jokes. But then some point down the line, they go, oh, wait, no, that was too far. World War II is offensive to me. And I know there's a fine line with that. I'm not... Okay, so here's the thing. I think you should be able to say whatever you want. Yet, I don't think that means you can get away with saying whatever you want, if that makes any sense. So, if you threaten somebody or an institution or things like that, I think should have... I don't think you should be able to get... Like, if you incite a bunch of people to do something awful, And it's obviously like you held a big meeting and you're like, hey, let's do all these awful things. Like, yes, you should have the right to say that if you want, but that doesn't mean you get to say it without consequence of your actions. Yet I think, especially when we're looking at comedy and the whole context was making a joke in the first place, that's taking it a bit too far. And it's very nuanced, yet it's this idea of order following, that someone didn't like what I said, they didn't like my joke, and they took it personally, and they decided, instead of just letting it go, that they were going to ban me from the game for a week. You know, doing something I really like and taking it away because they saw that as a good thing, that I deserve to be punished. And, you know, I know it goes both ways and it's very synchronistic. And, you know, makes you careful what you say too, because especially in the world we're in, especially moving forward, it, as this vibration hardens or it becomes more prevalent, because that's the whole thing I was talking about the last episode, that this technology is just going to amplify this vibration until the world goes crazy with it. And also taboo topics, like some things need to be talked about. If no one's ever allowed to talk about something, then it just shows you that it's about control and controlling the narrative and what people think and trying to keep them in a box and afraid and not asking the bigger questions and the truth. You know, just running on the hamster wheel. And I believe this is a slide from Mark Passio about order followers and how order following is not a moral thing. Now, if someone's saying, hey, let's get together and do this thing, let's do it, and it's moral, then it shouldn't be an order. Yet telling somebody, for example, like the military, to kill somebody, and you cannot question it, or we're going to throw you in jail, or we're going to harm you because you did not follow that order. And that's what you're here to do. Not to question us, you're here to do what we tell you, and especially with the military, that usually means hurting other people or things like that. And we usually really look up to these jobs and these people in our society because we're in this inverted world where they want that to be the pinnacle of what most people want to be, is just someone who's taking these orders. And that there's this thought experiment that Jordan Peterson had where he was talking specifically when he was in his college days about that it was normal people that became the guards of all the internment camps. That they were just living their normal life, and then boom, 5-10 years later, they're doing all these awful things. And that's just because they kept following orders and they kept justifying it to themselves that they were these good people and that this deserved to happen to these people. Or if not that, they were afraid to stick their head out and be mulched by the authority system for daring ask a question. Because, like I was saying earlier, they don't like it when you ask questions, especially when you're in the military sense, or you're the one applying this inverted force and will upon the world, because it's obviously awful. And I kind of like this vibration I'm talking about with Agent Smith from The Matrix, and this is just what it feels like. It's just dealing with these agents that pop up, and they all have this same vibration because they've given themselves away to this system without critically thinking about it and being empathetical to see who they're stepping over so they can feel good about themselves and their job that's hurting other people, or at least censoring them and banning them from other places, which is usually called moderation. I'm not saying you not to have no moderation, it's a real fine line before that goes downhill really fast. So I found this guy on a YouTube short that he went to go see a special version of The Matrix at a Los Angeles theater that's kind of based upon the Las Vegas one. And he says, I have entered the Matrix. The Matrix is real. Because especially the point of the fourth movie, that the Matrix video games in the Matrix experience hid the truth that they were in the Matrix. So it's kind of the same thing here, that our movie about the Matrix hides the truth about being in the Matrix, but he's revealing that truth and saying he's in the Matrix while he's in that movie theater watching the movie. In this very fourth wall breaking way, in a new format called shared reality, where it plays on a 4K screen and then they impose AI images on the back to make it seem like you're more in that environment and that it's more immersive. And they expand and simulate new lights and sounds, and in the fancier ones they'll have like air machines and things like that. And this guy was saying the best part was when they fed us. And they will give you a steak during the scene where Cypher is talking about how he would rather have ignorance as bliss and go back in the Matrix, not question anything, and just take whatever orders as long as he gets his comfy life and he gets to eat his steak. And, don't question where the steak comes from or if that hurt anybody. No, it tastes good. Just shut up and enjoy it. And, when the Oracle gives him a cookie and is talking about all these fourth wall breaking, brain melting ideas, they gave him a cookie. And how, back to the Las Vegas sphere, that they used AI to do the same thing with Wizard of Oz to add all this extra stuff on it. And that they had all these wind machines, and they would even drop rubber apples onto you while the movie's playing. And it's kind of this taking a bite of this apple, and how this technology is the thing bringing it to life, especially AI. And back to this idea of the Matrix and this code trying to impose itself on reality, because Smith tried to take over the Matrix in the machine world. He's like, no, it's all going to be my vibration. I'm going to control everybody. Everybody's going to be a little Smith connected to me. Kind of like a vampire AI hive mind I've been talking about all this time. And that leads me to Severance, that I said I was going to talk about last episode. I've been wanting to talk about this since the very beginning. And also kind of back to what I was talking about, why I numbered the presentations the way I did. I finally feel like I'm getting traction and I'm talking about all these shows I've been waiting to talk about since I made the first presentation way back all those months ago. So this show is huge about In the Mind of God, and this is the opening credits of the show about how his consciousness is going into his own mind, and that there's all these different versions of him, and all these characters are running around as he's looking through all these different parts of his neurons and his gray matter in his brain, and how he's basically looking for himself throughout space and time and all these different versions of himself, but that's all within the mind of God that's dreaming, but he's trying to wake up from a dream that's in his own mind of God. It just goes deep. And how this technology is also adding all these alters and personalities and changing it all up and adding all this chaos and trying to control our minds. And related back to the Lamb, and how we'll go to this idea of sacrifice, because they're vampires and they need someone to, give them their life force. And this idea here that, consciousness is trying to ascend out of this icy area. And I also want to relate him because he's orange in all these scenes, and how Will Smith was orange in all these authority figures that were wearing all these ties and suits and uniforms, and how he's trying to basically ascend the mind of God and learn the truth past all this chaos and craziness, and how even his higher self is trying to help him do this. And we can think back to also in Men in Black that this journey started when he went to the authority tunnel and he went down the elevator to take the test. So once again, the elevator comes out, and how it's also your higher self helping you along that same path, even if it seems like random synchronicity. And that this is all because this artificial being is trying to trap us in its own narrative over and over and over, and how we're trying to save ourselves from that narrative as well. And how they need these real human beings and light because they don't actually have it themselves. And this I talked about in the movie Annihilation, that this entity from space that's corrupting everything in chaos is trying to copy her and needs her to, fully become conscious. Back to the idea of the Truman Show, how they needed this real human being for their entertainment. So you can look at it from all levels, from beings that suck physical blood to others that live vampirically and energetically and through entertainment as well, because we did the same thing. So the main plot of this show is that, well, we'll get to this, but this is basically the divine care right here. And this black elevator, once again, because the elevator can represent ascension or falling down, but also the division between these realities and levels of your brain. And how right here they want you to go to sleep, And we'll get to this little guy here in a little bit and what they're trying to actually do. So he works at this facility called Lumen, or this company called Lumen. And they have this big facility that's modeled off one in real life. And there's this big fake artificial town that almost no one lives in that the people work at. And I kind of wanted to relate this back to the Truman Show, this fake artificial town that they put this real person in. And even Westworld's the same thing, where they have this table that shows them this big artificial world they made full of robots, and they watch the real people inside and try to give them these adventures that they paid for. And in Severance, when they go down these elevators, when they enter the building, they go to another altered in their personality. So the them that went in is not the one that lives down there. So that's a big part of the show, that they have their own personality that lives in this company and performs all these duties in this company, but he doesn't know anything about the outside world, and the part of him that goes back to the outside world doesn't know what he's doing in here. They only both can speculate about what the different parts of his mind are doing. They aren't on the same page. And this false light Lumen company is the one that's purposely putting him in their artificial environments and keeping them from connecting to their whole mind of God or the Akashic records or what have you. And they call it the severed floor. So they're severed from their higher mind. And they take all these different departments and they separate all of them, and it's a giant maze. So they don't want any of the real people finding each other and talking and saying, here's what I'm doing. It's a lot like the Manhattan Project, which is back to this atomic energy and trying to invert it to take over the world, that they didn't tell, or the space program, they didn't tell anyone that, hey, this pencil is going to be used for the space program. The government just told them to make a better pencil with these specifications, and they just send off the pencil not knowing what's going to happen with it, or whatever, part they're making. They don't know what it's going to be used for as a whole. And it's the same thing with this Severance. And their job's called macro data refinement. And I remember a few months ago, this kind of hit me like a brick, because the way they describe it is that there's all these numbers and no one knows what all these numbers means. And you find a group of numbers that makes you feel a specific way. And they especially call it scary, or at first. And that's funny, right? That you think numbers, or like a pattern of numbers, is scary. What are they connecting this to? And this is what I'm doing. I'm connecting all these things that don't seem like they're connected at all, that make people feel scared, and putting it all together for this. In this case, everything they're doing is being hoovered up by this company. So they're putting together this bigger picture that the evil people can't do themselves. And they make a point that this family, they have all these plastic statues of them, but this also represents, kind of the evil of this world, that they're not actually real. They're kind of just these plastic dolls that are being, marionetted around by this interdimensional force. And they specifically relate it that they want to ascend, this evil family. And they need real people to do that. And there's all these creepy pictures. This is basically they need real people so that they can keep being evil people and carry out their evil plans. And it turns out the main character's wife, that he thought was dead, has been in this facility the whole time. And they've just been experimenting on her to make their dreams come true. And I kind of wanted to take this back to the fourth Matrix movie, that when Neo and Trinity are connected, they make this energy source. They have this infinite energy that they can create between them with their love. And that's why they're reincarnated back into the Matrix again, is because the machines can't let that energy go, because they're vampires. So they keep putting them back in the Matrix right next to each other, but they aren't allowed to touch. They aren't allowed to be together, because they can siphon off the energy as they're there. And that just reminds me of like Mithras slaying the bull, or the cremation of Care at Bohemian Grove, that they're sacrificing this Care so that they can have the world they want. And so it goes back to the show that the main character is basically talking to himself. He's using a camcorder to talk to his higher and lower personality, And it's interesting that he's filming this in front of a fireplace with a man and a woman. So again, that generative force of the ascended man and a woman, and he's trying to basically reconcile his lower and higher self to save her and save her from this facility. And when he goes back into the facility in the last episode of the season, they made this really big creepy artwork. I believe it was called the Apotheosis of something, or something very similar to that. And you can see the main character in the front right there. He's kind of making like the Baphomet pose. And they need him at the computer, kind of like I'm in front of a computer right now connecting dots. And all of his friends and colleagues are around. You can see back in the right corner right there, there's a bunch of goat people. And how, once again, we're back to the goat symbolism. And all the creepy family that are above right there that are trying to live forever. You can think of the vampires looking over the main character and all of his friends, guiding his fate because they can't do it themselves. And here's the main character right here looking at that in kind of this fourth wall breaking way, and how the evil people are pretty much laying it straight out in the symbology. Here's what we're doing. And I just want to make a point that this is the granddaughter of that evil vampire family. And she made a point to go down there herself as kind of like a PR stunt. Yet it turns out her lower personality actually is kind of a good person without all the programming. So her and the main character down there fall in love with their alternate personalities, yet upstairs she's the granddaughter of evil, and she's manipulating him and trying to get him to finish their ultimate evil. So it's kind of interesting about that. And they make a point of dancing to the beat. And I wanted to connect this to the last episode I was talking about, the football movie Him, and how they're trying to make this inverted ascension, and they have this marching band in the back. They want you marching to the drum of their beat, not to the drum of your own. And how within 24 hours of making that video, the Door Brothers made a video called Vampire Touchdown, and they haven't been posting a lot either. It's not like they post every day, like maybe like 2 or 3 videos a month if it's a good month. So the odds of that happening within 24 hours just is like, oh my goodness. And in it has the Kundalini snake, so this inverted ascension once again, and how the main character basically sacrifices his friend and becomes a vampire so his dreams can come true. He went the wrong way about it. So this is the divine care in this artificial facility being watched by all these evil people trying to make their dreams come true. And we can kind of relate this back to the lamb of sacrifice, that they need someone to sacrifice so they can live forever and perpetuate the cycle over and over and over again. And the context right here is that this is her child's crib. Yeah, they've wiped her memory, so she's building this crib and she has no idea what this crib is because they're trying to make her the ultimate vessel for this family right here. Because they're trying to make the perfect, basically like Manchurian candidates. They're trying to make the perfect people with split personalities and alters so they can put their favorite alter in you, and then they know how to stack them so that they can basically become mind control vampires and transfer their very consciousness and personality to these super traumatized individuals. And that's the whole point of this facility and this false light company Lumen, is creating these vessels, these broken vessels for themselves through trauma and mind wiping and altars. So the main character ends up saving the lamb and keeping it from being sacrificed. And he goes down into the facility through the elevator and finds the divine care again. And it's very interesting that the season ends that you can think of this door right here as basically to the outside or back to the mind of God, out of this artificial environment where they can go out and live their lives. And he's about to go out, but yet he goes back in for the inverted feminine, or at least the good part of her. Because down there she's not evil, but when she goes upstairs, she's evil again. And they go running back off into the facility, and that's where the season ends, and they haven't made a new one since then. And it's kind of interesting, that once again, this main character that can't die is running back into reality to redeem souls. And I kind of wanted to go this go back to the ninth gate, which I was talking about in the last presentation, that the main character goes on this quest and deciphers this riddle and has this like reality ascension ritual right here, and it's hijacked at the very end by this fallen angel inverted feminine so she can take over it for herself, like the Whore of Babylon. Yet I kind of wanted to talk about the good side of this, because in Samurai Jack, they train this girl from birth that's like a hybrid of this demon family to go kill the main character and stop this prophecy so evil can rule the world, because evil can't defeat good straight up. So they're trying to make all these hybrids and machines to do it. And the main character, or this ascended masculine, ends up saving and redeeming this inverted feminine. So she ends up going from a villain to a hero, and they're a love interest, and all of that, kind of like Severance. So there's kind of this, if the masculine can be redeemed and wake back up and get his power back, the same can happen to the feminine, which is also the plot of the new Matrix movie. So it kind of just keeps reappearing that the ascended, awakened masculine loses memories once again thrown back in time. Yet even as he does so, he wakes up the feminine as well, and they unlock this atomic energy that they can use to reshape reality to their image and make it better instead of evil the way it is right now. And I was talking about that earlier, that there's this age of imagination coming to life and all these superheroes and monsters, and that's what allows it, is this atomic energy that's unlocked by these two individuals in this story. In my opinion anyway, it's two sides of the coins. It's all how you look at it. It's all just energy. We're just asking what you're doing with it and where we want to go and what story we want to tell and how serious we are about it. So I want to say thanks for joining us on C'est La Vie. This one was kind of off the cuff, and sorry if I kind of got a little jumbled in there. Like I said, I want to work more on that and making this more into a concise presentation. Yet I want to say thank you for joining me for the rough patches, and it's hard for me to imagine how other people might perceive this information because it's just all over the place. And that's one of the reasons why I didn't talk about this for so long, is because part of me knows how ridiculous this is, yet I'm so kind of far down the path of this, and 15, 20 hours into talking about it, and that's already years past making all these presentations, that it's kind of hard for me to look at these topics in a way that I did 10 years ago, starting out when I was all fresh-faced and new. And I was never fully along with the mainstream. I always had big thoughts, yet I was still going along with it for the most part. First year of college, I was a transhumanist with a VR headset, and I was showing everyone the VR headset, trying to get them all hyped up for virtual reality. And I thought the people in the positions of power in our society weren't actually that bad, and there wasn't anything really nefarious about it. And I've since updated my opinion a little bit, to say the least. I also want to say I love comments of any kind. You don't have to make a big thing about it, and they can also be negative as well. I just ask, like I said, for constructive criticism, because I've had someone say, like, hey, this isn't my vibe. And I asked, like, can you elaborate at all? Because I feel like I'm making food, and I hand someone the food, and he eats it, and he's like, that's not my food I like. And it's like, what went wrong? Is it too sour? Is it too salty? Is there too much vinegar? Is the texture not quite right? Like, at what point did it go wrong? But I never get that, so I'm just back to the kitchen trying up all these weird things, wondering, hey, is this going to get the response I want it to this time? And just kind of a balance between that. And part of the reason I'm making this isn't just to say I'm right. I'm actually asking some questions here, but just that, these things are coming from synchronicities, the mainstream, my dreams, and just all kinds of weird stuff. Like, just in the last 24 hours, just how much is connected back from dreams to, like, the Men in Black and to calculus, and how when I woke up today, I didn't think that's how today was going to go. So, once again, if you're joining me on this special journey through infinity and time and space as we know it, thank you. And hopefully I'll be back soon to talk even more, yet life's weird, so I guess we'll just have to see. Yet, until then, peace!